John Ortberg writes in his book, The Life He Always Wanted to Live, about a member who struggled with his church. Ed was a person who had been told as a young child all his life that if you give somebody a compliment, you don't know the rest of the statement? If you give somebody a compliment, they might get a big head. Oh yeah, you do know it, okay. They might get a big head. And so he had a special gift, a special ministry in the church of cranial reduction. No one missed his scrutiny. No one missed his correction and observations. He just couldn't help himself. If it wasn't the music that was too loud or too bombastic, it was the pastor. And when he preached, the messages were just dead, or they weren't deep enough, or they were too long, or he couldn't hear it. Or maybe it was the kids running in the hall when they shouldn't be running. They should be sitting with their hands folded, of course, not making any noise. Or maybe it was the food at the potluck fellowship meal. It wasn't warm enough. It wasn't healthy enough. It wasn't adequate enough. Or someone got in there before he was. Everything he grumped about. His ministry gift didn't necessarily add to the atmosphere of the church. In fact, it became so bad that when a visitor came to visit one time, he told them about his complaints and things that he didn't feel were appropriate. And after that encounter, the pastor took him aside and said, "This cannot go on. You're driving people away, and we're trying to attract them." And after that, the pastor thought he had made things very clear and that this should not happen again. He was in his office a few weeks later, and someone came and was introduced through the receptionist or secretary at the front door, brought back to his office. And the man was nicely dressed in a suit, walked in and was welcomed by the pastor. They found a seat, and he said, "I'm from OSHA." And the pastor was thinking, OSHA, that's for work sites. And the individual started talking about noise at airports from the airplane engines, and noise from pneumatic tools that made, jackhammers and that kind of thing, that made a lot of noise and could actually damage your hearing. And by that time, there's a ring of faces around his door kind of looking in to see who in the world this guy is and what he's talking about. The janitor, the secretary, assistant pastor, all are just hanging on every word. The pastor says, wait a minute. He says, "I've never been visited by an OSHA official in a church before. What's going on?" And the OSHA official said, "You can't believe all the harassment I got at work when I was sent to bust a church for OSHA violations." Ed had turned in the church because the music he felt was too loud. Now, my point is not about music, not about potlucks, not about sermons, not about kids. The point is, Ed had come to church every week, year after year after year, and nothing ever changed. He had studied his lesson. He attended faithfully. He came to midweek service. He was always there, but he was always a grump. And no one had any hope that he would ever change. In fact, I wonder if he had ever had an actual experience with Jesus Christ, or if he was just attending because that was culturally what he did. His children didn't see any use for church because it had never done anything for Dad. His son had a wonderful, beautiful story of how he met his wife, but he didn't tell it to his father because Dad would just criticize it in some fashion. Year after year, no one ever expected that Ed would actually change. that he would actually have a transforming experience with Jesus Christ. Do we expect more from our religious experience? Have we encountered or actually had an experience with Jesus Christ? Mark chapter 4 accounts for us a circumstance where the disciples had just gone through an amazing experience. Chapter 4, starting with verse 37. Here's what it says. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet! Peace, be still." And the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you not still have faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who this is? Even the wind and the waves obey him." They had just gone through the ride of their life. It was terrifying for them. The disciples had faced a brush with death. And I don't know if you've ever experienced coming this close to buying the farm. When that happens, you're wasted the rest of the day. It takes you hours to recover your sense of balance again. I'm not talking physical balance, just your balance of life view. And that was what their experience was. Early in the morning hours, their boat bumped onto the shore, onto the gravel beach of an area called Gadara, or the Gadarene coast. That was a town nearby. It was part of Decapolis, which means Deca, 10. 10 cities in that region made up that district or that area. And those 10 towns had interesting experiences in that area, but they had stumbled ashore there. Just off of the gravel beach was a limestone uprising, and limestone is soft and easily eroded. And so there were natural indentations and caves that were on that limestone bluff. In fact, people had even chiseled out by hand areas where they could make a natural or enhance a natural cave to be a tomb to place their departed loved ones in, the dead. So the disciples unsuspectingly had stumbled in beside a cemetery. Picture it, if you would, an early morning, dawn's rays are just coming on, their nerves are shattered, their knees are knocking, they're still seasick, and sailors don't get seasick very often, but they're seasick from the experience in the storm at sea, and all of a sudden, this creature comes screaming and yelling out of the tombs as if to tear them limb from limb. His hair is long and matted. His mouth is foaming. His eyes are deranged. His fingernails are like claws as he scratches at his own flesh. And you can see the blood running off of him. His clothes are shredded, and he's terrifying to look at. Wouldn't you be scared if something like that started chasing you? You guys are tougher than some, huh? The disciples did what came naturally, I think. They turned around and started running back for the boat. They couldn't get off of the boat fast enough because of the storm, and now they were glad to find the boat again and try to push it out into the water very quickly. And as they did that, they counted noses and noticed that one nose was missing. Jesus. You ever notice in the Bible how many times people lose track of where Jesus is? When his parents brought him to Jerusalem, they lost him for 3 days. Just a few hours before, during the storm, they had lost Jesus. Where was he? He's right in the boat, but they'd lost him. They weren't even thinking about him until at the last moment they finally, got courage enough to say, not a Hail Mary, but Lord, save us. And now they lost him again. And suddenly they were distracted to look back and see where he was, and things were different. It was quiet. It wasn't noisy, and the quiet attracted them. It's fascinating to see this experience and read through it several times. But Jesus is back with the demoniac, and the lack of sound attracts their attention. There's no mad scramble to get on the boat anymore. They're returning to where Jesus was for a closer look. So look, if you would, in Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 6, where it recounts this story. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet them. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with chains, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. The disciples saw an amazing transformation take place. This man had an experience with Jesus that was like none others, and it made a whole difference in his life. He wasn't clawing at his skin anymore. He wasn't disturbed. He wasn't agitated. He was calm and in his right mind. One translation says, clothed in his right mind. That's a good description. His eyes were bright and intelligent. His actions were composed and peaceful. And his voice was no longer shrieking. It now perhaps was even either still or giving happy praises to Jesus, who had transformed him through that experience with Jesus. Now, I confess, if I was a disciple, that probably wouldn't have been my track. My tack would have been to take some of those soap samples that I get oftentimes when I'm staying in a motel, take the guy down to the shore and just really scrub him from top to bottom. Maybe out of my bag, I would have taken an extra set of clothes and donated it, to his goodwill. Maybe I would have found some clippers and given him a haircut. Maybe I would have trimmed his nails. Maybe he would have just cleaned up and shaved until he did look better. So he's good to go, right? After I scrubbed and reclothed him? No, he's still a raving maniac inside. It's not until he has an experience with Jesus, until Jesus transforms him from the inside out, that there actually is any change that takes place. Because all those my cast-offs might look good for a little while. His clean and shave might look good for a short time, but would not last long until he was back into his old habits again. Well, maybe the demoniac would say, well, if I give my life to Jesus, I'll lose my good looks. I'll lose my strength. I'll have to change some of my habits. It sounds silly, doesn't it? I mean, what's he got to lose? He's at the bottom. I'll have to reorder my life. It'll change my income. Lord, leave me alone. It's too much of a risk to give my life to you and have you change me. I can't stand to have you really modify my life. But anything Jesus did for this man was nothing but an improvement. Anything Jesus did for him was nothing but something that elevated and added something positive to his life. He changed him for the better. He enhanced his life. Now, I like as you go through the remaining parts of that chapter, it's interesting that the townspeople come because something's happened here. You remember the pigs going over the cliff and all that kind of thing. I'm not going to focus on that. But pretty soon the townspeople come and they say to Jesus, "Please leave." Go away. We don't want you here. And you feel like saying, guys, don't you realize what you have? Don't you understand what this individual, Jesus Christ, can do if you let him stay? But they ask him to leave. Now, we would never do that, would we? We wouldn't ask him to go, maybe, but we might neglect him. We might turn a cold shoulder in his direction. We might say, not now, I'm not ready. Don't bother me with that. And so we, in a sense, push him away and ask him to leave. In the last scenes, verse 18 and 20 of that chapter, it says, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him go and said, go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. Seems cruel. This man is begging to go with them. But we have hints and insinuations in the gospel stories that he really took that seriously. And he began telling other people. Do you think he'd have a convincing testimony? Hardly anyone would recognize him. But he could really hold you spellbound as he talked about his transformation, his experience with Jesus. And when Jesus returned to that area, the feeding of the 5,000 was in that area. Other occurrences when Jesus passed through that way indicate that he had a whole host of individuals that were convinced by his testimony of who Jesus was. So when Jesus returned, they welcomed him and invited him to come. Jesus is the great transformer. He can change our life if we have an experience with him. And the gospel accounts go on to say many times when Jesus encountered individuals, how they were transformed. The wedding feast, Jesus transformed that event. Mary Magdalene changed her whole life. The woman caught in adultery helped her through that time. Lepers were healed. Blind men were healed. Nicodemus, a religious leader, was transformed. There's hope for all of us, isn't there? Jairus' daughter raised from the dead. The widow of Nain, her son brought back to life and given to her. 5,000 were fed with a sack lunch of a little boy. Paralytics were raised from a sick bed that they could not get out of, all because they had an experience with Jesus, who is the great transformer. But that was long ago, and things like that don't happen anymore. A few years ago, a friend of mine who served in my capacity for the Kansas-Nebraska Conference, Harry Reimer, shared with me an experience that he had. He was doing a summer project. During the summer, he thought he would build a shed. How many of you have sheds? What's in the... No, I would. Don't tell me. People put bicycles in there. People put lawnmowers, rototillers, edge trimmers, snow blowers, gas cans, oil cans. To declutter their garage, they build a shed and they pack more stuff in there. So Harry was going to do that so that he would have less junk in the garage to trip over, more room for his car. Trouble was, all he had to go to the store to get the shed with was his small car. Well, he said, I'll just go and get a few sheets of plywood at a time, a few 2x4s, enough to do a little bit here, and then I'll go back and get some more. It's only a few miles to Lowe's. It's not a problem. I'll just make several trips back and forth. So he went to Lowe's, got one of those carts, went around, got a few sheets of plywood, a few 2x4s, enough to really get started, and then he was wheeling it out to his car. Now, I don't know, maybe Harry was more optimistic than I am, but picking up a big sheet of 4x8 plywood and putting on the top of my roof of my car is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So he gets out to his car, and he's kind of looking it over and waiting a moment how he's going to get it up there without scratching it all to pieces. And somebody parked nearby in a pickup. There was a guy leaning against the side of his pickup with a can of soda in his hand. He said, "You need some help there?" And Harry said, "Sure." A ray of hope suddenly. And the guy says, "You're not going to strap all of that on top of your car, are you?" "Well, I thought I would." "What are you building?" "I'm building a shed." Guy looked at him and said, "That's not enough to build a shed." He said, I'm a carpenter, a framer." And he said, "That won't do." "Well, yeah, I was just going to get a little bit now and come back later and get some more when I need it as time goes by and haul it on the top." "You're going to scratch up your car something terrible or dent the roof." He said, "Why don't you just put it in the back of my pickup and go inside and get all of the stuff you need, and we'll put all of it in my pickup and take it to your house in one trip." And Harry thinks, wow, what a nice guy. So he loads his $300, $400 worth of lumber in the back of the pickup, and he takes his cart and he almost runs back into Lowe's. He gets some more plywood. He gets some more 2x4s. He gets some, all the things that he thinks he needs for this shed. And as he's just about rounding the corner to go to the cashier, he says, "Oh, how dumb I was. I put $300 worth of lumber in the back end of a pickup of a total stranger. I'm going to go out there, and he's going to be gone, and so is my lumber." But he was right at the cashier. He swiped his card, got out as quick as he could. He wheeled out there, and of course the guy was sipping his soda. They loaded up the rest of the lumber in the back of the pickup. Harry was a bit more optimistic since he was still there. And he says, "I don't know where you live, but you drive, I'll follow, and we'll be there in just a few minutes." And so Harry gets in his little car and he drives to the entrance. He thought to himself, "Oh yeah, I know how this is. I now have over $1,000 worth of lumber in the back of somebody's pickup that I have never met before in my life. I'm going to go left, he's going to go right, and there goes my investment for a shed." He wasn't very trusting. They made their way to his house just a few miles away. He parked his car on the driveway, plenty of room on the driveway. The other guy parked it on the road, and they unloaded the lumber onto the driveway, and he assumed his position again. Must have been a new can of soda by then, I'm sure. He started talking to Harry. Harry is a minister for many years, and he said, "I don't know if you realize," but he said, "about a year or so ago, I lost my job, I lost my tools, I lost my pickup, I lost my wife, and I lost my daughter to alcohol. But then I met a man, Jesus Christ, and he transformed my life. I have a job, I have tools, I have my pickup, I can see my daughter." And Harry felt about this tall for being so untrusting. But that man had experienced Jesus in his life in a powerful way. Jesus to him was the great transformer. And he had had a real experience with Jesus Christ that had made all the difference in the world. And he was not ashamed to tell people about it. He was glad to. Maybe you know someone who has had a transformational experience with Jesus. They don't have to be at the bottom of life, so to speak. They just have had an experience that has been transformational for them. I remember a few years ago when I was pastoring, I had Bible studies with an Indian. It was kind of come and go. He didn't seem like he was really interested. I had Bible studies with his girlfriend, and she was very interested. Since that time, I moved away, and I'd lost track of him for a number of years. He was a bartender, and I didn't think he'd ever have any interest in really becoming a member of the church. I bumped into him 7, 8 years later. He is a leader in the church up in Fort Collins, Andrew. He is very active in the church. He has a heart for serving the Lord in any way he can. He had a transformational experience. I just feel bad that I wasn't there to see it happen. But that's okay. It's not about me. It's about his experience with Jesus. And it made all the difference in the world. Maybe you need an experience like that too. What would it be like if we had an experience with Jesus? As we walk with him, what would it be like? Someone recently in a conference that I was at shared with all of us, an illustration that I think is very valuable, at least it was to me, impactful. And I need 4 volunteers. Thank you all for volunteering like that. You're all seated so nicely. Don't you appreciate them volunteering like that? Thank you so much. It'll be easy. Don't worry about it. It's encapsulated in the words of Psalm 23. And I want you to look at this as we share this time together. Psalm 23. This is walking with Jesus. If I have an experience with him, what is my life like? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pasture. He what? Leads. Okay, one of you stand up, please. I don't care who. Be brave. Okay. Good deal. Stand right up here, if you would, on this. You won't melt, I promise. All right. So, Jesus says he's going to what? Lead. Have you ever gone on a trip? You go someplace, you don't know where anything is at. It's nice to have someone who will guide you. Someone who knows the way and you don't. If you're going someplace, sometimes you punch in your GPS coordinates and that little machine does what? So you don't get lost. It's helpful. It is very valuable to have someone who can lead, who knows the way, who can protect you from going the wrong way and getting into trouble. Jesus wants to be that person for you in your life. And if I've had an experience with him and am walking with him, he will lead me. Not only that, there's more involved. I need 2 of you up here, please. Okay, one on this side and one here. Very good. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you know the words. Oh, that's kind of blurted out, but you should know it anyway. For thou art with me. Jesus says, I will lead you, I will guide you, and that's helpful. But not only that, he also says, I will be with you. That means by my side. David says elsewhere that when we're in trouble, when we're weak and we fall, if 2 are walking together, one can help the other one stay up if he's weak. It's helpful to have someone to keep me from going to the left, too far liberal, going to the right, too far conservative, keep me right where I need to be, right? I need someone that will protect me from falling into a cavern. This talks about the valley of the shadow of death. As I remember going through that area, it is a steep cavern. And if you get off track, it's dangerous. You can fall and be hurt. So Jesus protects me from things that, if I wander one way or the other, could be harmful to me. But that's not the end of it. He also says, surely goodness and mercy shall... the fourth volunteer, thank you so much. You have to move up a little bit. We have to get friendly here. Stand right there if you would. Right behind me, please. This says he will... Well, it says, surely goodness and mercy. Isn't Jesus full of goodness and mercy? He will follow me. Now, a lot of us want Jesus to follow us and give approval to everything that we want. Lord, bless me as I do this. Is that asking him? Not really. But Jesus says that he will have our back. I don't want something sneaking up behind me and attacking me. I don't want something coming up behind me and surprising me or catching me unaware. And Jesus promises that he will be one who has our back. And I need someone. There's no one better than him to protect me from the back. We want Jesus not just to approve of our plans, but he's also in front leading. So if he's got me going the right direction and protecting me from the back and also keeping me, that's a wonderful environment to be enveloped in. Now, I wish everyone would follow that. I wish all of us would have enough sense to stay in this place where we need to be. But sometimes someone who calls themselves religious offends us and hurts us, and so we rebel and we say, I'm not going to have anything to do with Jesus anymore. Did Jesus mistreat us? How silly is that? That's a much better place to be than out here by myself where I don't have anybody leading me, no one protecting me on the sides or behind. I need to stay in here where he can help me, support me, lead me, protect me. What a promise he has for us. If we have an experience with him, if we've been transformed by him, and then he envelops us in the most protective and most guarded and healthy environment. Thank you so much for helping. Jesus wants to be the great transformer in our life. These stories are recorded for our benefit. They give us hope that just as Jesus transformed and helped people in times of the Bible, just as Jesus helps people now, such as Andrew and Harry's story that I shared with you, that he can do it today with any one of us. I think of some major experiences. We just had some significant individuals in our society whose life ended because of tragedy. Doesn't matter if you have a lot or little. Doesn't matter if you're prosperous or not. Doesn't matter if you're successful or not. All of us need that transformation that Jesus offers. All of us need that experience to give our life meaning and happiness and joy and fulfillment. All of us need Jesus as the great transformer in our lives. And I pray and covet that for any one of you and all of us, that Jesus would be that for you.